afternoon, and in fact, good evening to all of those that are with us in this hemisphere and across on the other hemisphere. So, welcome to this series of webinars that we have been holding for, well, about 2 years now, being in touch with you with all this information, all the training, in talking about in depth about the preparedness for African swine fever and the prevention and response to such an emergency, and as well as other cross-border diseases. My name is Erika Calderon Suarez. I work for the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation and Agriculture, and I am the coordinator of this interagency group that is under the umbrella of GSTAT. We are the training group for African swine fever, as well as other cross-border diseases in GFSTAT. And we are composed of different agencies, all the agencies, international organizations, regional organizations, sub-regional organizations of Latin America and the Caribbean. We consist of WOA, FAO, CARIBET, CAFSA, CAN, CBP, USDA, OIRSA, COPEX, and IICA. So, amongst us all, we try to share all this training with you. We have gone down into the details of preparedness and response to emergencies, and now we will move into surveillance. So we have tried to reach you in great depth with all these subject matters. Well, anyway, to start the webinar today, which we will cover the incident command system, we will have some opening remarks by Dr. Martinez, Katia Martinez, whom is the sub-regional representative of WOA for Latin America and the Caribbean. Go ahead, Dr. Katia, the floor is yours. Well, for me, it is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar, to the Incident Command System on behalf of WOA, ICA, and other organizations Erica mentioned before that enable this activity. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this seminar or webinar. As Erica was mentioning, the initiative is held within the program for the control of cross-border movement of animal diseases as a result of the African swine fever that appeared in 2021. Ever since the beginning, all of these organizations have developed their agendas and have worked on the different countries in the region of the Americas. Capacity building is very important in each one of these countries, particularly in animal health, particularly in the context of African swine fever and avian influenza, which, amongst others, have caused significant challenges for the productive sector. These webinars give the opportunity to provide knowledge and to exchange experiences among experts and professionals from the public as well as private sectors of countries in the region. We thank you all for your participation and your commitment to animal health, and I am sure that collaboration and exchange of knowledge among experts and professionals present here will be fundamental to move forward in the objectives of our organizations and will improve the capacities and welfare of animals worldwide. I wish you a very fruitful exchange. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Martinez. And with this, we have officially opened our webinar for today. These virtual webinars are being broadcast through social media. We have ICA social media, Facebook, and the Spanish version, and YouTube, both in English as well as French and in Portuguese. The questions of this webinar will be made through the chat At the bottom of your screen, of your Zoom screen, you will see two types of chat. We have the conventional chat and we have the Q&A. So please send us your questions and we will be preparing those for the final panel, which will precisely consist of questions and answers. Today, we have three experts in the subject matter. We will begin first with some basics of the incident command system. And this will be in charge of John Roberts, the expert. Then we will hear some experiences as to the use of the incident command system in Canada, thanks to Dr. Michael DiMembro. And then we will also hear the experiences of Costa Rica as to the use of incident command systems through Dr. Luis Antonio Molina. So we remind you, write down in the chat where you are from, what countries are with us today, what organization or institution you represent or work with. And with this, allow me to begin with the meaty part of this presentation. The first presentation will be headed by Mr. John Roberts. A brief introduction about him. He is an international consultant in emergency response and crisis management. He retired from the USDA Forestry Service in September 2002 after 30 years of service. John founded York Consulting in 2002 to help capacity building and crisis management and emergency response. And to date, York Consulting has provided services to more than 25 different state governments, multiple entities of the private sector, 20 federal agencies, as well as universities, hospitals, and NGOs. He has helped more than 47 countries and territories to get prepared for crisis management and response through planning, training, and practical personalized exercises. He has been an instructor of the incident command system since mid-1980s. And for 8 years, he was director of the National Directorate of Emergency of the federal government and additionally director of the National Interinstitutional Training Center of the federal government. This center is specialized in training ICS, the Incident Command System, advanced incident management, training response teams at a national level in crisis management and response. He became part of the National Incident Management Response for Type 1 in the early 1980s, and he has experience in the command operation plans of Type 1, and additionally was part of the National Command Area teams up to 2005. In 2010, he was a commander of an NGO team that organized the churches in Haiti to serve as direct rescue mechanism to attend orphans immediately after the earthquake. With this extensive experience of John Roberts in incident command systems, John, the floor is yours for you to share your screen now and go ahead and give us a very interesting presentation. Thank you.
Unmute the microphone. There we go. We practiced this before, so let's see if the sharing the screen works. Is the screen shared there?
Not yet.
It's coming in right now. Okay, here it is.
Let's see. There we go. Is that have we got the screen up there where you can see it?
Perfecto.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Erica, for the invite. As we start off on this, the most important thing is I think that these are things that you do every day. This incident command system is a standardized approach to command, control, and management for incidents that you have. But the functional things that are designed in the system are things that you do every day. And this system is designed to really help you expand your capabilities when things get beyond what you would normally do, much like what you're dealing with the African swine fever. The other thing I'd like to mention, I think most of you are probably familiar with this, but those who are not, there are many good supporting documents, but two that we've utilized in the international training arena over the years. The first one you see there on the left of the screen is from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Good emergency management practices, the essentials for responding to animal health emergencies. And the incident command system provided a basis for much of what you see in there. And it's a good reference document if you're not familiar with it. The other one is a smaller paper that talks about the progressive pathway for animal emergencies, which you can see there on the right. And these things provide the backdrop for what we're talking about today. The progressive pathway is a process that enables animal emergency health officials and countries to further develop their capacity for response with training and exercise programs. And both of these are a good template for the things we're going to discuss. One of the things that I'm sure is obvious to most of you that have dealt with a major transboundary animal disease, this particular slide is out of that Food and Agriculture organizational document. And all this means is that the entire community in a country, of the entire government, has to work together, health, finance, and on a daily basis, we may not do that. So the whole preparedness concept is centered around how do we all train and organize to work together when called to do so. Because most of the time we don't do that. One of the experiences in my background was the World Trade Center terrorist disaster. I was part of an incident response team that responded to that in September, and we're there in September and October. And what becomes apparent is it's not your normal job. You're dealing with so many people you've never talked to. And you have to have a way to communicate, to work together. And this includes all levels of government as well as the private sector. And so how do we do that is what this system helps us do. As I said, the incident command system is just a management system. It can be used to manage any type of incident. And particularly, we're interested in animal health emergencies in this webinar. But this system has been used for earthquakes, floods, the Olympics, regardless of their size. And again, I'd like to point out, because it's helped me in the past to communicate with others, these are things that you do every day. You make plans for what you will do today. You had to plan to get up early enough today to be on the webinar. So the functional components of the system are something you're already familiar with. extremely useful, provides organizational structure, but it's also a way to plan and build and adapt that structure to the particular thing that you're dealing with, which by the very nature is probably an emergency, and it's not something you deal with every day. Using this for every incident, it's much like anything. In order to get good at it, a person needs to use it and practice it, exercise on it. I was never very good at sports, but I was even worse when I never practiced. So if we had a team that was working together that had never practiced together or exercised together, when the time came to respond to the incident or to play the actual game, we'd not be very good at it. So it's necessary to improve skills and utilize it in a planned way. I think one of the things that is the most different about this responding to an incident, in an emergency response, you're called upon to simultaneously plan for and respond to the incident both at the same time. You make a plan maybe for long term, but each day as things change, you have to replan, maybe reorganize, organize more resources, materials, change your management structure, change your organization. Normally, in our day-to-day work, we'll make a longer-term plan and execute it. But this one requires you to simultaneously do both things. And that requires a different structure than what we use on a day-to-day basis. Represents the best practices, and what we mean by that is this lesson learned from the previous incidents. Erica mentioned my time at a national training center. One of the things that the training center was known for was also called a lessons learned center. The idea being that the lessons we've learned from African swine fever in the Dominican Republic, or foot and mouth disease from Taiwan, England, wherever we've encountered those things, those lessons we learned in those incidents need to be incorporated into the next incident so we do better. So the incident command system itself helps us to do that. As we said, it may be used for planned events. Public health emergencies are good examples, and acts of terrorism, sadly enough. We've utilized it on those many times, the earthquake in Haiti, floods, hurricanes. It enables us to come together with a common structure and a common language, and we'll talk very briefly about that in just a moment. Coordinated response among various agencies. In our situation, in my experience, early on, when we had a sizable incident, we may have the military involved. And that's something we didn't do on a daily basis. So it forced us to train and work and cooperate with them in order to prepare for emergencies. And those documents that we referenced at the front are an effort to continue that. So the coordinated response is a big thing, with common processes for incident level planning and resource management, and how to integrate all of these things into a common structure and organization. The key elements, and I'm just going to touch on these briefly to familiarize you a little bit. This is not an introduction to incident command system training course, but these are the key components that make up the system that we're some of my colleagues about the work with this institute, I'll refer to IICA, IICA, and they look at me and say, "What is that?" Because they have not heard of that acronym. So I have to refer to the Institute Cooperation in Agriculture, and then they understand. So the common terminology was a large thing, particularly when you're going to be working with multiple countries, multiple languages, in an incident such as the swine fever. So this brings together a common organizational structure that everyone is trained and committed to. Modular organization, you can see a small sample there on the slide. These functional things are done in your everyday life, all of them by you. And as the incident grows, many times we just have to expand on those things and delegate with a modular structure to help us build something everyone can use. Management by objectives. The idea there is obviously we want to stop the disease. You want to stop the spread. So you have an objective. And in the next slide, we'll take a brief look at the planning process of how you organize to meet that objective and solve the problem. So defining those becomes very important. And again, this is a process, nothing magical about it. It's a process to make sure that we address the issues that we've had on previous incidents so we don't repeat our mistakes. Incident action planning, there's a process for that we continue to follow day after day after day. And some incidents are short term. The World Trade Center, for example, was a very long-term incident, lasted months. Much like your transboundary animal diseases. And I would say I've had a lot of experience, a lot of years in incident response, and public health and animal health emergencies are about as complex a problem as you run into. People look at the World Trade Center as a terrible disaster, and it was large loss of life. But the entire operation was contained on just a few hectares of ground when the things that you deal with are countrywide or international and have impacts on adjoining countries. So the transboundary animal disease thing, as well as public health emergencies, are the most complex. Manageable span of control. How many people can we effectively supervise? If you have 4 or 5, that's not a problem. If you're trying to supervise 100 people, you probably need to reorganize. Incident facilities, standardized incident command post, maybe places to land aircraft. It provides for that. Comprehensive resource management refers to there has to be a process to order what you need, be able to get it, be able to track that resource, manage it, release it when needed, to return where it came from. You need to know who is on your incident, hold them accountable. In this day and age, sadly enough, there are people sometimes that want to cause issues or problems for us, that want to be part of the incident so they can cause problems. And what resources we have, we need to know who they are, where they are, because how else would we be able to manage them? Same way with the dispatch and deployment. We've had people wander on to an incident. They want to come see what's going on. So how does someone get there? Who ordered that person? Do they have the proper equipment, personal protective equipment, certified to do what they're doing? And the last key element there, information management and intelligence. And think about the sensitive information that deals with international trade and the things that you all do each time. And how is that information managed? How do you share that sensitive information? Who has access to it? These things become important, and it's part of this structure where we don't forget to do those things. A simple example, again, this is not designed to be the training for the incident command system as much as a broad overview, but the simplicity of it is that we have all kinds of problems and issues. And if you think about the kinds of problems and issues that you've had on incidents, avian influenza, I was deeply involved in that one in several different countries and places at different times. Exotic Newcastle disease, or this African swine fever. And when we look at that, you can ask, do we have organizational problems? Certainly, there are political concerns and issues. The media or the press coverage here in the U.S. is a major job just to manage those things and the public perception. What key messages do we want to get out to the public? Is the food supply safe? The international trade implications that you deal with. And this is just one way that I use and teach the process when we have small exercises or in training. If you remember, we talked about management by objectives. So you start off with identifying all the problems and issues that you think you have. And each day you'll have more. And so this management by objectives, you establish some objectives to solve the problem. If you're having a problem with the media, okay, what is your objective? How do you want to contain or manage that? Most of the time, I found the veterinarians in particular are very technically capable. They know what to do with the transboundary disease and how it needs to be dealt with tactically. But all of these other issues, the media, the press coverage, dealing with the military, if they're assisting as they did in the first foot and mouth disease outbreak in the UK in 2001, how do you coordinate and operate with all those people? Those become objectives that are part of the incident that have to be solved as well. Then you formulate a strategy to deal with that. Are you going to vaccinate? You're going to euthanize and dispose of the carcasses? Well, what's your overall strategy to deal with those problems and meet your objective? How do you task organize to solve that? Cleaning, disinfectant, surveillance, movement control, permitting, all of those things become part of your organization. So you say, we have to do vaccination. How many and what type and kind of resources does it take for you to do that? This becomes your resource order, the resources you need, then you organize them into a structure to go do the work. On a daily basis, that's very simple, but on a massive countrywide response with lots of international partners, it's very difficult to do that. And I know you're well aware of that. So once we task organize, determine what's needed for the operational aspects of it, we also wind up having to think, how do we support these things logistically? Who's paying for this? And we have to continue to plan while we're responding. So all these things become the organization that we implement And then you continually assess what you have. And that becomes this daily planning process to adjust more objectives, maybe review the objectives, strategy, is it working, task organize, implement, and assess. And it's a consistent cycle. This is just a brief summary of some of the issues that I had personally been involved in other workshops, which are the same ones that crop up on much of what you deal with on a daily basis. Coordination with other ministries, health is an example, public health. Political instability or concerns. Seems like in the U.S. we always have the biggest problems we're dealing with, and there's always an election nearby that has to be considered. No one has unlimited economic resources. There's concerns about market closures, loss of employment. Plus, it's inconvenient. You have a normal workload, and briefly in covering that, this is not your normal job. You have plenty to do without African swine fever. So now you have another job. And sadly, many times what I've seen is someone will work the incident all day long, and then after 12 or 14 hours, they go back to their normal job and try to do that overnight and come back. It's not going to work very well long term. It's a different job. We have to find a way to set aside what we're doing if we're going to be involved in the incident, because it is an emergency. And I think of a building being on fire. If your building catches on fire while we're doing the webinar, I hope you're not going to say, well, I got to finish the webinar. I'll try to put the fire out with my left hand and be on the webinar with my right. We have to stop what we're doing, respond accordingly. And then lack of training and preparedness, which is why you're having the webinar and why we do the training and exercise, much as outlined in the progressive pathway document we talked about. How do we become proficient at this so when we respond, we're more effective? These are just more organizational problems that we talked about. I know you're going to have a copy of the slide presentation, and we talked about funds. Is there going to be compensation? What's the method that we're going to use? And one that's maybe a little bit unique to what you have to deal with a lot is this information management. People want to know if the food supply is safe. You have to be careful what you do and don't say, so that how it affects international trade, and so you have a lot of very unique things that this system would help you organize for, that to provide oversight of that sensitive information management and who has access to it. That's often overlooked if we don't have that predetermined. Again, this was just a little quote from the Good Emergency Management Practices. Says the adequacy of existing response capacity and immediate additional needs has to be addressed to determine the scale of the incident management operations. And if you have a pre-planned response team, you can be much more efficient. If you already know the organization you're going to have to fill, who those people are that can do those jobs best, and you can build a very small organization, or you can build a very large organization very quickly. And sadly, on many of these incidents, they require a large organization. Several thousand people operating on one incident is not at all uncommon. Benefits of ICS, we clarified a lot of these. It clarifies chain of command, supervisory responsibilities. Who do you work for? Interoperable communications. Mostly providing for an orderly, systematic planning process with a common management structure is one of the major benefits. And then that fosters cooperation between the ministries. And again, it's built on best practices, uh, the lessons we've learned from all the things we've done before. I remember the FMD outbreak in 2001 in UK, and then after that, they decided that if they had a nationwide thing like that, they would not be able to do the depopulation the same way that they'd done it the first time. They said that was never going to happen again like that. And they learned that because of what they did. So this is built on best practices to ensure the safety of responders, meet our objectives, and it's designed for the efficient use of resources. With that, I think I'm pretty close to the 30 minutes. And as I understand it, the questions will be done during the panel discussion at the end. So with that, I'll stop sharing and turn it back over to Erica.
Muchísimas gracias, John, por tu excelente
presentación. Thank you very much, John, for such an excellent presentation, because I think it really provides us with an overview of the uses and the importance of incident command systems. I think that you, John, explained it in such a sort of straightforward and simple way, because for everyone who is familiar with incident command systems, but also for those who are not familiar with them, it is really an organizational method to manage emergencies. So it is so important for those of you who already know it, it is a system that is very adaptable, that it can really adapt to the needs of each country. Like John said, we use it pretty much on a daily basis to plan our day-to-day activities. So I do encourage you to obtain more training on ICS, because these webinars are not intended to train you in depth on these systems, but rather an attempt to raise awareness on these important preparation issues for emergency management and in the prevention of transboundary diseases. So our goal is to try to share these topics with all of you in a way like a checklist of the issues that you should be preparing yourselves for and how to implement them in your countries. So thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Because this topic is sometimes difficult to assimilate, but at the same time, it is widely used by, for example, firefighters in our countries. So that's even more than we imagined at first. We are doing a virtual training with John on this topic, organized by ICA, and we do hope that together with other international and regional organizations, we will be able to offer you additional training as well. So with this, we will continue with the following presentation. This will be given by Michael. Let me share with you a brief summary of his vast experience. Michael DiMambro, he has spent more than 25 years working on incident command systems, both in a context of response and also of preparedness. After studying production and management at Victoria University in British Columbia, he applied the concepts of incident command systems to preparedness and organization of live events. In 2003, he started working in the context of emergencies, helping with response to fires in forests, and also working as the person responsible for logistics and the assembly area. After joining the Canadian Food Inspection Agency in 2007, he participated in different emergency responses to foodborne diseases, which affect humans, as well as plant pests and other animal diseases throughout Canada, such as influenza in 2007, in 2009, 2010, 2014, and 2015. Bovine tuberculosis in 2016 and 2018. monocytogenes, Listeria monocytogenes in 2009, E. coli in 2012 and 2013, as well as others. More recently, he worked as the Assistant Director of Incidents at the National Emergency Operations Center of CFIA, and he activated the response to the avian influenza outbreak of 2022. Since he obtained the certification of trainer of incident command systems in Canada in 2014, Michael started teaching regular courses on incident command systems to public officials and first-line responders, as well as those who work in the industry, by defending the importance of an all-risk system to coordinate the response efforts. Currently, he has a unit for veterinarians, inspectors, and support personnel responsible for supporting the regulating systems for plant and animal health in the south of Alberta. This includes the preparation of an initial response to the detection of notifiable diseases. So with this very, very vast experience, Dr. Michael, you have the floor, and your screen is enabled for you to share your presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. One small note: I do not have the privilege of being called doctor. I'm not a doctor, veterinary or otherwise, despite my initials. But that is one thing. Be very clear about that. You should be able to see my screen at this point. So I'll just share here. So I believe we're set to go here. My presentation today to you is going to be about incident command system in practice, and I can build on many of the concepts and the principles that John mentioned in his presentation about both our preparation as well as our experience in applied ICS during the HPAI response from 2022. There we are. So again, a two-part presentation today. First, outlining the start of our presentation and how we got to now and our plans, and then issues encountered, mitigation strategies with our response, best practices that we are going to implement either during response or going forward, and lessons learned in future planning. So very quickly, CFIA was formed in 1997 by combining inspection services from a number of Canadian federal departments: Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada, Health Canada, Fisheries and Oceans. Well, our mission was and remains that we're dedicated to safeguarding food, animals, and plants, which enhances the health and well-being of Canada's people, environment, and economy. In the initial stages, relatively little emphasis was placed on preparing for full-scale response to foreign animal disease finds. The original thought, at least was explained to me, and this happened before I joined CFIA, was that daily business or daily operations would handle the initial finds, and then organization would come later. Our first major foreign animal disease response was BSE, detected in a domestic animal in 2003. And this response strained our response and our structures considerably. It overloaded local capacity, and it highlighted some issues with the decentralized approach that we had in place at the time. That was quickly followed by a detection of HPAI in British Columbia's Fraser Valley, which holds a high concentration of our country's poultry production. That was in 2004. It further highlighted these issues, especially as it required a very high concentration of responders deployed to a focused area, deployed from their daily operations, their daily jobs across the country. After action reviews of these responses showed some significant communication gaps internally, as well as with industry and government partners. Many responders deployed felt that there was a lack of overall direction, not enough strategic planning employed by CFIA, and insufficient efforts made to track and communicate progress. So overall, there was a lack of knowledge about the plan and a lack of integration of all responders and elements of response within the planning process. The result of that was the response, it dragged on. It was too lengthy, and many individuals deployed were not utilized effectively, while others were grossly overworked. Another key finding was that our communication with some potential partner agencies, our provincial counterparts, as well as our federal counterparts, was inconsistent. So I'd like to stress, and going into lessons learned, any lessons learned exercise, none of these issues encountered were the result of any deliberate attempts to interfere or hamper response. The responders throughout the agency were acting with the best of intentions, but the good intentions don't necessarily translate to effective response. So we were hampered a little bit by lack of overall coordination and the fact that we had no centralized system to respond. Following these early responses, a decision was made to adopt an all-hazard incident management system to coordinate all of these disparate elements, field planning, promoting integrated planning, and facilitate communication, both internal and external. Case studies resulted in the study of a number of different management systems. We looked at consultation with our partner agencies, tried to see what other agencies in our federal and provincial families were doing, and we also sent observers to look at response activities in other countries. Such as responses in the UK. There was extensive consultation with our USDA partners as well. We also looked at strategic planning for an agency-wide emergency response strategy about the same time. So efforts to catalog our qualified responders, identify and stockpile sufficient supplies in anticipation of another event, as well as standardizing procedures for deployment that all contributed to these plans. This resulted in the first version of CFIA's Animal Health Functional Plan, which detailed the overall response, and it was supported by technical documents that detailed response criteria for specific diseases. These are known as hazard-specific plans. So the main overarching document supported by the more technical plans as well. And ICS training was rolled out widely to CFIA staff starting in 2005, with subsequent waves of refreshment training, part of which I'm dealing with right now. Broad view are our plans. They'll contain a very similar diagram to what we saw in the previous presentation. So our incident commanders, supported by the commanded general staff, the information officer, liaison officer, safety officer, responsible for those facets of response, as well as the functions in the general staff, of course, operations, supporting field operations, planning, supporting tracking analysis of data, as well as driving the planning process, logistics, responsible for support, direct support to the field operations, and finance and administration, responsible for tracking, compensation, claims, anything of that nature, procurement and contracting. So this does, as we mentioned in the previous presentation, follows the standard span of control and doesn't exceed our set span of 7:1. So it was done with that in mind. Okay. Operationally, our FAD response efforts in CFIA are divided into 5 broad categories informing these plans: response to confirmed detections, control of vectors and identification of new threats. So this is largely focused on information and situational analysis, biosecurity, enforcement and investigative services should any regulations be broken, as well as maintaining a single point of contact with affected producers. So heavy promotion on that, and that was a key lesson learned from early on. In diagram form, it looks like this. Now, I apologize, this is a little bit small. I had to shrink it to fit it on the page here, but you'll see these are done with in a branch system. So under biosecurity, we've got groups for field biosecurity, as well as facilities biosecurity, and cleaning and disinfection for a focus. In response, destruction and disposal of things ordered destroyed, animals and things ordered destroyed by under the Health of Animals Act. We've got our evaluation operation and owner compensation that provides the analysis and comes up with and facilitates payment of compensation for things ordered destroyed, and site supervisors to promote on-site control. Within control branch, we look at field epidemiology and movement trace, movement controls, so any quarantines or movement restrictions, movement permits issued, vaccination and treatment if it is a disease that we employ that strategy, vector control, again, if we employ that strategy, as well as surveillance and diagnostics. So all of the sampling, this is where our sampling teams would be reporting into, and further expansion of the chart, as well as sample submission to our lab network and lab liaison who will coordinate which lab gets which sample set. Right? We have a network of labs to try and spread out the work, but we need that coordinated very much from the field level. We also have our enforcement and investigations and our case officer group to ensure that any violation of regulations is followed up, as well as a constant contact is maintained. You'll notice that these plans are set up very functionally in a group model, though we are considering moving to what's called a division group hybrid to allow a little bit more control or closer control and a very strict delegation of authority at a given site. But for right now, we are very much in a functional command space as opposed to a geographic one. With supporting the logistics supporting the operations in the field context, we also have planning, logistics, and finance activated. Of particular note in the planning section, we've got a technical specialist unit that's pre-identified, especially epidemiology to assist in risk determination of premises, as well as disease control within a regulatory context. Right. Documentation, because our incidents we already know they're going to be very, very heavily regulated and over a wide geographic space and affect a number of industries. We have people dedicated specifically for filing for data management, database upkeep, training, data verification, as well as CEMERS, or the Canadian Emergency Management Response System, which is our official database. We are looking to replace that with an updated version, but that's still the official one in the plans. All of these contribute to documentation's function of collecting and managing the volume of information received, and it is quite daunting, the amount of information received. More recent innovation, we incorporate geographic information systems, or GIS, and dedicated situation reporting assets within the situation unit, which will augment our capabilities for situational assessment, for analysis, and indeed passive communication capabilities within the response structure. So with some of the displays that the situation unit keeps up with the adoption of electronic tools, sometimes our questions, if these information displays are kept up to date and kept accurate and available to our wider organization, obviously following the principle of intelligence and information management, we can look at answering questions even before they're asked. Questions we get from senior management all the time. How many premises? How many responders do we have? What's the data positive? How many primary control zones have we done? If all of that is updated in real time via the situation unit's displays, many of those questions are headed off. In the logistics section, we can also see the supply unit is significantly expanded, and we've dedicated response assets specifically to travel, purchasing, orientation, equipment storage, as well as staffing roles. These processes, this was done because these processes are quite technical and quite specialized within the CFIA context. So we've dedicated resources specifically to those functions within the greater supply unit, or supply unit in logistics. That was the start. Between 2005 and 2022, we began to update and implement best practices and lessons learned from the responses that we had gone through, and these include some provisions for unified command. The original plans didn't really accommodate for unified command, so we looked at the need for that and incorporated that. It was used to great effect in the HPAI 2014 outbreak in British Columbia, so we were unified command with the province of British Columbia. Dedicated subunits, as you saw there, within logistics, increased utilization of GIS and electronic data management systems within the planning section, as well as coordinated information functions internally as well as with partner agencies. So our information officer had an expanded role and was much more in communication with their counterparts in other agencies. Okay. So we looked at this, and with our expansion of experience and of knowledge, we started to plan for bigger and bigger events. 2014 was unified command, 2016 bovine tuberculosis response, and 2018 with the same disease provided our opportunity to coordinate response activities over a wider geographic area. These were multiple province outbreaks reporting under the same structure. Right. While field activities were directed by the incident command post, we also had additional coordination, policy clarifications, and support to the wider agency provided by our National Emergency Operations Center, which is headquartered in our national headquarters region in Ottawa. This body works closely with the ICP to coordinate the overall response, providing advice, managing import-export implications, and communicating progress to our international partners. So all of these plans were updated. All of these plans showed progress between 2005 and 2022, and our response was getting more and more coordinated, which leads us to 2022 and the HPAI outbreak nationwide throughout the country. That's what it felt like. A little bit by the numbers of 2022. It was first detected in Atlantic Canada in very late December 2021. Additional positives occurred within the Atlantic.
Okay. Adelante, Michael.
Oh, my apologies. Okay. Additional positives occurred in Atlantic Canada in early 2022 through the months of February. Then we had detections in Ontario, Western Canada, and Quebec in that order occurring in the spring. And by the end of April 2022, we had 9 out of 10 Canadian provinces affected. So we had multiple ICPs in different areas, all trying to be supported by one National Emergency Operations Center. And we had a few challenges. So this was truly a coast-to-coast response. We had positive detections occurring from Vancouver Island in the west to St. John's, Newfoundland in the east, approximately 7,000 kilometers apart. Central coordination was problematic given the distance, given the time zones. We were dealing with 5 time zones using both official languages. This was one of the first times we had ICPs set up using both official languages in all regions of the country, as well as sustained response efforts lasting more than 18 months. So 2022 necessitated these activations in multiple agencies, and the additional field response came with burdens of coordination, consistency of policy interpretation, and deployment of scarce resources. That all increased exponentially. In previous responses, responders from different areas of the country would often act as relief for each other in subsequent deployment waves, which would allow for easier replacement of responders on an ongoing basis. In this case, we couldn't do that because reserves of both human and material resources were being used elsewhere. Many jurisdictions, compounding this, we had many jurisdictions in Canada still under our occupancy limits and restrictions due to COVID-19 in early 2022. So we had many CFIA employees who were trying to respond working remotely or in a hybrid model, sometimes remote, sometimes on site. So we needed additional support to help incorporated responders deployed in a remote capacity, and we relied very, very heavily on electronic means to do that. But this was our first time through. Just a rough depiction of the first year of the outbreak. Between January 2022 and January 2023, you can see here the different colored bars representing staff deployed to each ICP, the various parts of the country. And the line here is number of primary control zones that were declared or active at the time. Right. So this side we have active control zones, and here on the left we have total number of responders deployed. And that peaked in May 2022 with between 700 and 800 responders deployed actively at the time in five different ICPs. So a lot of challenges posed by that. In all, total number of responders deployed top 2,000, almost entirely internally sourced from CFIA. So that was roughly the equivalent of taking away at any given time, and forgive me, I don't have an exact number, but approximately 400 full-time staff away from our agency for 18 months. So quite a drain on resources, quite a drain on workload. We also face some challenges working with our industry and stakeholder groups. We've been working with various stakeholder groups for many years to try and work more closely with them in responding to diseases. This outbreak presented a very complex variation on that. Representation across the country was not homogenous with these groups, and different sectors in different parts of the country outlined different priorities. In fact, some sectors were not represented by associations at all, and some were more regulated, some were less regulated. Questions also arose around the legalities of their direct involvement, being private sector, in regulatory matters and what exact work those individuals could perform. Eventually, these questions were resolved via consultation with the National Emergency Operations Center, and the employment of private industry to perform certain response duties did commence, especially in tasks like disposal, destruction, as well as compensation. Third parties were employed to work through that under CFIA oversight. We also looked at different mandates between federal and provincial agencies, which meant differing priorities in response. Some agencies concentrated primarily on disease control, while others were more focused on mitigating the economic impact, maintaining the supply chain, or recovery of the industry or affected producers. None of these priorities at all are objectionable in and of themselves, but they can represent opposing viewpoints and differing approaches to a given situation, depending on their outcome and depending on their viewpoint. So the formation to mitigate this, we formed working groups at the national level to communicate regularly and examine given problems collectively. So, and that did help. It did take a long time to get these groups together, but it did start to ease some of the communication issues we had. Another issue that hampered our cooperative response was information sharing and whether parties were legally able to exchange some proprietary information collected by one of them. Efforts are now underway to address this via policy, and we've just come out with a standard procedure for sharing information collected among these partners for the good of the response. We developed a number of best practices here too. We learned very early on that providing for responders' mental health in a long haul deployment situation was very important. Stresses of deployment and the duties expected, especially things like cervical dislocation in a large population, they took a toll on the responders deployed, and many of them reported some symptoms ranging through the gamut of stress reactions. So integration of a dedicated mental health resource attached to the safety officer function assisted with this. Now we're working on codifying it, and moving forward, you'll see a little bit more of that in subsequent slides. More involvement of our partners, our stakeholder associations, industry, and our government partners. We saw a significant expansion of assets deployed to the liaison officer function because that position became very, very overwhelmed really quickly. In essence, turning that into a concerted unit and splitting up the workload to encompass provincial, so contact with our chief veterinary officers of the province, industry, contact with the stakeholder groups, federal, so federal partners such as Environment Climate Change Canada, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, the Public Health Agency of Canada, and also with Indigenous duties within some of these, so to liaise with First Nations groups. they help coordinate that, the various efforts, and help to move the response forward. This is an idea, again, mentioned in the previous presentation, with the whole community approach, and moving that through the liaison function helped to promote a whole community approach. We also looked at frequent and open communication with all individuals involved. It aided us in establishing a common purpose, and the establishment of, in many of the ICPs across the country, all staff meetings attended by agency representatives. It promoted a sense of openness, it promoted a sense of common purpose while outlining the plan for a given operational period. The expansion further of the case officer function promoted the single point of contact for each affected producer. From start to finish, each affected producer had someone they could call, as opposed to our previous practice of rotating people out, making sure that we had one set of contact, and that producer had only one person, one set point. And another key thing to mention for best practices, the adoption of a multi-user interface for data collection. So we're able to provide updates by improving our database and improving our support to our databasing. We were able to view results much more closely to real time than we ever have before. So this greatly reduced the burden of both briefing as well as information verification. And incorporating electronic networks is something, supporting electronic networks as well, is something we want to look at moving forward. So some key lessons learned that we plan to incorporate into our future planning. Examine deployment lengths and trying to see what makes sense for different positions. We need to examine differ from our standard deployment. In the past, that was 3 weeks based on a number of factors, but there are some positions where it's more effective, and it was found to be more effective to extend that deployment length. For continuity, case officers, like we mentioned, compensation and evaluation specialists, and some command and general staff members are among those roles considered. HPAI taught us to more carefully consider the adequacy of support needs. So integrating our planning a little bit more closely, integrating our data gathering and access to it, integrating our access and our identification of need for consumables, resource ordering, as well as things like access to corporate services and advice. So labor relations, compensation and financial advice, all of that needs to be incorporated if we're going to build a more resilient response structure. We also see response activities. They can result in situations where gaps in policy appear. Right? In CFIA, we normally address these situations via a decision record, which outlines the circumstances of the situation, the possible gap, and the chosen direction or decision, as well as the supporting rationale. It's crucial, though, that these decision records are posted and made available to all responders to ensure consistency. And in this multifaceted response, this can amount to an exercise in higher math. So unorthodox situations outside of policy can be encountered in differing response organizations simultaneously. A way to combat this, and what we adopted within this response, was a master list of decision records and direction provided applicable to this response and all responders in this response, and it was known as the Event Response Protocol, or ERP. That's a key lesson learned, and we plan to incorporate that into future planning. A few key initiatives in future planning. Better identification and tracking for available responders. So we need to do a better job of tracking who these responders are, who's responded in previous positions, as well as their training and qualifications, in order to select and deploy the best possible resource to a given site, the best person for a job. Standardizing our communication protocols for internal and external audiences, hoping that we can use that to expedite some response activities. Clearly establishing what information is able to be shared readily will allow us to expedite that sharing process and stop some of the policy questions or some of the other means to figure out, or the time it takes to figure out procedure. as well establishing what requires higher level approval and what needs to wait. So hopefully reducing overall wait times for information to be sharing and communicated. Integrating our planning processes and hoping that we're going to expedite planning processes as well as support needs and clearly identify what our support needs are. And finally, development of standardized training requirements coupled with a comprehensive exercise plan for our responders, including those from our partner agencies, stakeholder groups, all of those. It's critical to maintain our response readiness. Prior to our 2022 outbreak, we hadn't had a major response in close to 5 years. And quite frankly, it showed. Quite a lot of people hadn't exercised. There were a number of people who had moved on to different positions, left the agency, and that left us with gaps. So coming up with a broader emergency strategy, including a training and exercise plan, is going to be critical to maintaining our response readiness. With that, as I understand, again, questions we're going to be taking care of in the Q&A session here toward the end of our webinar today. So I will end off at that point, and I thank you very much for listening here. We'll see if there's anything else that any other items for me here.
Muchísimas gracias, Michael.
Thank you very much, Michael. Very interesting, all your experiences that Canada has had in addressing, particularly in the avian influenza outbreak. This is a very good example for all participants and for ourselves of how to address and the benefits of the incident command system, in the sense that in a veterinary service, we do not have the capacity to do. All of us that work in the veterinary services, official veterinary services, we cannot do everything. We need to delegate. We have to work interinstitutionally. So we do not have the human support to work all the time of an outbreak in different functions and disciplines, and therefore we need to delegate, and that is precisely what the organization of the incident command system is all about. So thank you very much for those examples. And we will have more examples of this, as is the case of Costa Rica. We would like to share how this can be used both in Latin American countries as well as in the United States or in Canada that have much more staff. The incident command system is very flexible and can be adapted to all capacities. So, in this sense, I would like to welcome Dr. Luis Antonio Molina. A background about Dr. Molina. He is a veterinary doctor specialist in equine surgery. He is a master in project management and is also regional director of operations for the Central Western region in Costa Rica, 30 years of public service, national coordinator in management of animals in cases of disaster. He works at the National Animal Health Service, SENASA, at the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. He is a substitute representative of the Ministry of Agriculture at the Emergency Center of the National Risk Management or the National Emergency Commission here in Costa Rica. So, Dr. Molina, the screen is yours, as well as the microphone. So, go ahead. Share your presentation now. Excellent. You just need to put it on presentation mode. Got it. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead. No, your microphone is on mute. Believe it or not. I'm not quite used to this. To this modality, so sorry. We use Teams. Oh, I see. Okay. Can you see the full screen? Okay, here we go. Okay, now we got it. Fine, thank you. I am honored to take part, particularly looking at the quality of the speakers before me. Here in Costa Rica, we have received the Incident Command System training, quite some time ago, but we made a big effort more than 10 years ago when we didn't even talk about the Incident Command System in the agriculture sector. So basically, we started from scratch. The FAO gradually came into the Incident Command System after that, and we had to start without any international benchmark, if we can call it that way, to start using it. And it is fantastic to see how over the years this has become perfected. I would dare say we have advanced quite a bit. Here in Costa Rica, we have a very complex emergency management system, very different from that of other countries, because our global emergency management system is a risk management national system, not under the army as happens in most countries, as would be the case of civil defense in most countries. In Costa Rica, we have no army. So all institutions, the national risk management system, most government systems have a role in the event of an emergency. So just imagine, Mr. Robert, as you were saying at the beginning, how difficult it would be to coordinate an emergency in Costa Rica when we do not even have civil defense. So this system has been studied internationally, and it works. It works basically because of a common language, which is now the Incident Command System, and has always been so, except in the agriculture sector, it was not known. As you can see here in this outline, we are in several phases of the operational response of any type of emergency. If the emergency is epidemiological, or veterinary epidemiological, then the National Risk Management System has the obligation of supporting the animal health system in the country in that emergency. The police, firefighters, Red Cross, public works of the government, all the national risk management system would support an epidemiological emergency or non-epidemiological, as we call emergencies in the cattle or livestock area that do not have to do with natural emergencies. So when there is an emergency that has nothing to do with animals, we have the obligation to contribute our resources to that emergency, to evacuate people, to distribute food and supplies to the people that have been evacuated. So this is a system very different from that of most countries in the world, where everybody has to do everything. And the concept of shared resources and distribution of resources and unified incident command system is the backbone of overall emergency management in Costa Rica. Otherwise, we would not be able to have all the machinery, as you can see here. Here we can see in the communities there could be an emergency, and it goes up from the community committee to the municipal committee and to the regional emergency commissioning and the national emergency coordination center, and so on and so forth upwards. And you can see how the National Animal Health Service, SENASA, has a representative in the COE. There are representatives at all different levels in the regional, municipal, and community levels. For that machinery, we need to have the incident command system. In Costa Rica, as I was saying, since 2010, we started training in animals in disaster. In the event of disasters, we trained 150 agricultural technicians, and they were certified in the incident command system. This helped us very much to bring in the agricultural technical experts into the national risk management system in our country. As Mr. Roberts said before, the incident command system is a system to have facilities, protocols, procedures, personnel, equipment, communications, and an organizational structure, either complex or simple, because the system could be expanded or could be contracted to ensure resolving any incident. And this applies even to a quinceañera party, a 15-year-old birthday party for a girl. Who is going to escort the girl? There will be procedures. They will need equipment and people. This works for anything we do in life. In different emergencies of a natural nature, which is our biggest experience, because thank God, cross-boundary diseases, we have had very few, and we have been able to control them quite quickly. So we have the procedures, but the experience has been developed through other types of emergencies. The control scope, you cannot have a structure of more than 5 people, much less colleagues, when these are field staff. Why? Because you're not looking at them. I was telling my colleagues that when you're at a maquila at a factory, and the boss is up there 5 meters above, watching over the staff. But when we have people in the field like this, they're visiting farms and they have to work with total autonomy, making their own decisions. You cannot have more than 5 people under your control. That is what is called, that is what we were talking about before. So modular organization applies depending on the type, magnitude, and complexity of the incident, and this is established top-down. It grows. It grows bottom up, depending on the resources. What happens if it is a small outbreak and the structure is small? But if the outbreak grows and expands in area, this structure will have to grow also in its scope of action. So we have to stretch out that structure, making it bigger and bigger. But the basic structure of modular organization is kept. And we will see that in a moment. There has to be a vertical command system that was explained before. You cannot start thinking, well, listen, well, do I eliminate these animals or do I not? Do I implement quarantine? Do I vaccinate or not? There has to be an incident commander, the person who knows the most about that subject matter, that will have to make those decisions, and the rest of the team will obey. There is no such thing as democracy here. Here we have the command unit, and there are vertical decision makings. Since this arose for a different type of emergency, just imagine the case of a person trapped with limited oxygen, and then people start to vote. Okay, well, raise your hand, those of you that say we should bring a tractor to try to remove the debris. Okay, or the debris, or okay, raise your hand, those of you that think we should use a lever. No, no, no. One person that has to be the most trained to make the decisions and orders what has to be done, and the others obey. Otherwise, the emergency will not be controlled. That commander must say what has to be done, and the rest of the people follow those orders. This was in the Cinchona earthquake here in Costa Rica. A series of NGOs, the National Emergency Commission was present, and the National Animal Health Service was present there. They were heading the incident for the command for the animal side, but this was an earthquake in a dairy land where most of the farms, pork pork farms and dairy farms basically had been destroyed. So there was unified command. This was just a little piece of the emergency, the animal side. But here we have the people from the judicial branch recovering corpses, people cleaning up the streets, so that the animal health people could come in and see the dairy farms, and there were NGOs rescuing pets, for example. The National Animal Health Service was present, responding with the different farms and animal farms. And Dr. Barrantes, who is the one in black here to the right, he was there, and he was responding. He was talking to the liaison for the National Emergency Commission, which was responsible for the rest of the team. So in Costa Rica, particularly, although this does not exclude other countries, but here we need to obey a unified command. We also, even the minister, and the political side, we cannot ignore the political side because they will pop up there anyway. Political authorities that have much more power will show up there, and we have had very interesting experiences. That energy with the politicians coming to an emergency, yes, but zero technical knowledge. We need to learn to channel that because we cannot tell him, "Oh no, you don't know about this. Move aside." No, what we have had to do is that, well, they come to help. Okay, make them help, make them work, because the political level is way over and above. So this is where the incident may hinder the task if you do not bring them on board, and they will help you improve the response if you can bring them on board and take advantage of the energy they have come with. The one in yellow here is the Minister of Agriculture. He came to ask for information, and he offered to help the incident commander. There are some functions. Well, we have already mentioned those quite quickly. So you have to learn to adapt the incident command system to the livestock emergencies. Okay, now let us see here. This is a different type of emergency. We had in the northern border near Nicaragua, this structure we have adapted. We will present three structures we use here: non-epidemic emergencies and two epidemic emergencies, classical swine fever and avian influenza. So this structure, which is from the incident command system, we have been adapting it according to our experiences over, 13 years? Ever since we started to use the incident command system. So in the case of non-epidemic emergencies, notice here, for example, that the incident command structure is right here in the middle. But from here up, we have a technical structure in orange, and then further up, we have the political structure. Why have we added it? Because we cannot ignore it. We're going to take them off their backs. They always want information. They are always going to be worried. So the incident commander is down here, this yellow part here at the bottom. So here we talk about an officer, a legal officer responsible for the emergency declaration and seeing whether we have to enter in a given site or not, and a communications officer responsible for the media, the liaison officer. The liaison officer is usually yours truly. I coordinate the emergency for SENASA, and I coordinate with other institutions in the event of any response. And then we have the field operations, surveillance, animal assistance, evacuation if necessary, logistics, human resources, vehicles, inventory, planning. As the previous speaker said, here we would have epidemiologists involved, that they would evaluate the plans if it was an epidemiological emergency, and then the administrative team in charge of procurement and accounting. This is how we deal with non-epidemic emergencies in the country. For example, this was during an earthquake that occurred 200 kilometers away from where this structure of a poultry farm collapsed. For classical swine fever and African swine fever, we could see here how we have this adapted to the different pests, and we have an incident command here. We have a commission created by the SENASA law, integrated by the operations director, head of the legal department. We also have the media, and we all have the same structure that we already mentioned, that we have been harmonizing for SENASA, because common language is very important for the people in the field, particularly those that have to address epidemic emergencies and non-epidemic emergencies. If we change the scheme, what will we do? Cause problems at a local level. And if we do not change it, well, we will work much better. So this surveillance group here is responsible for inspection reports and laboratory services. For biosafety, these people cannot do the same work as the quarantine team do. So here we apply sampling, and the surveillance group would be the one that looks for the problem, gathers the information, and then here we take samples. That is the biosafety side. And then we have the depopulation and disinfection. And in case of the two types of the African swine fever, we do not have that experience in Costa Rica, but we did, maybe 30 years ago, 31 years ago, in fact, we had an outbreak of African swine fever, if I am not mistaken, in our country. And we responded as best as we could without the unified command and without this system that we could apply now. In the case of avian influenza, notice the same scheme. So the epidemic emergencies are quite similar in how they must be addressed. We have not had major outbreaks of influenza in Costa Rica this year. For example, migratory birds came through our country. They basically affected pelicans, but not domestic fowl, except in a farm near the beach that had a lake, and it only affected a group of birds that they had in captivity. So we were able to contain that in less than 2 days. And it went down to South America, and now it is on its way back as temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere rise, and they will come back through our country. So we have our eyes open. So this system, in a Newcastle outbreak we had in 2015 in Costa Rica, well, that was quite similar. We did the same thing that I already explained. The person responsible for the program here, well, we had not considered vaccination. Now we do have it, and we had a group of logistics incorporated. What is in yellow would become different task forces. If we have several outbreaks, we would need several task forces for inspection and diagnostic reporting, tracking, and laboratory services. So what we have done are simulations.
We did certain simulations in the center of Costa Rica. This is the Central Valley, where we have a dam that receives migrant birds. And in this red circle, you can see the different kilometers, the surface where there could be an outbreak. So we have 25 farms and almost 1 million birds in this area marked in the red circle. So if there is an outbreak of avian influenza, this is in this region, and that would surpass 3 or 4 times our capacity in the region. So according to the ICS, we would have to multiply this for an n number of times, that structure, and that is allowed by the incident command system, expanding the structure so as to cover the emergency. Only in this circle, we would need to restrict 5 routes of access. This would involve containment personnel with doing 3 shifts, 8 hours each shift, and the quarantine. For example, this farm, this white roof that you see here, only there they have 350,000 birds. Costa Rica is a very small country, but still has more than 20 million species, 20 million birds. So there are more birds than people. And so that really creates a difficult situation. And we hope that the ICS will provide a more solid structure and more in keeping with the needs of the emergency. These are photographs of the Newcastle outbreak in 2014. And when you see this, sometimes we imagine huge buildings, yes, for the command system. And that's our command post. That picture shows a command post. These are our resources, yes, that we can use. There is a tractor that is fumigating in an area, and to manage the carcasses, for example. Here we are doing depopulation, and this is a Newcastle outbreak that we had near the border with Nicaragua. We have a border, a very thin area between Lake Nicaragua and the border of Costa Rica. It's less than 1 kilometer, where some migrant birds exist, and there was a Newcastle outbreak. And also backyard birds. It's not the same thing to put together a structure to depopulate birds who are in a technified bird production unit than in a backyard operation. In the first case, we maybe have 2,000, 3,000 birds and 5 square kilometers, and it's 2 weeks to depopulate because we had to chase them, actually chase them. They were running around. So all of the logistics that involved, yes, that incident command system and the need to address that emergency is completely different than when you go to a backyard operation and you depopulate maybe in a day, tops, with 10 people. Yes? So here we had 25 or 30 people, and still it took 2 weeks to achieve control and total depopulation. Thank God, and thank to the fact that the national management system helped us. You can see here in the upper slide how we have the police supporting, and we were able to help the municipalities and have them help us with their teams as well as the National Emergency Commission, which supported us with funds to be able to control the situation. And in 2 months, we were able to eradicate the outbreak, and we are free from Newcastle. Applying coordinated work and interinstitutional work as described by the incident command system. You can see here the control posts, other mobile units that we have. These are other control posts, command posts. Sometimes, you imagine a huge car with antennas and like a camper and all those things. Well, Not our case. We don't have that type of equipment. So the incident command system is versatile enough to adapt it to different situations. So that is an overview of what I wanted to present. And like I always tell the people at ICA, I am passionate about this topic. And if you let me, I will speak for 3 days about emergencies. I'm passionate about it and passionate to talk about the experiences that we've had here. So thank you very much for this opportunity, for this space. And I do hope it was interesting for all of you. Thank you, Dr. Molina. We will take you up on that invitation. We will invite you to talk for hours about the topic. Excellent presentation. Thank you so much. This is really what we wanted to achieve, right? With our presentation by Canada and by Costa Rica, because like Dr. Molina said, you can see how versatile and how flexible the system is. The incident command system can be adapted to all the different capacities. The only thing that will allow us to operate with the system is good management for emergencies, good organization, distribution of the roles to manage emergencies, and not only human, but also financial capacities and resources. So congratulations, really, all 3 speakers were really interesting. They have plenty of experience, and this is really what we wanted to share with all of you, to really raise awareness and say everything that we wanted to share about incident command systems and how to manage emergencies, not just from an animal health perspective, but also from a natural disaster perspective. All of this with the ICS. We are ready for the questions. We have a lot of questions that we've been receiving through the chat. I would like to mention the fact that today we have people from Senacica in Mexico. We have the Federal Organization of Environmental Protection in Mexico. We have a command system for ASF in Ontario. We have the School of Veterinary Medicine of West Indies University. We have the Sonora Technological Institute in Mexico. We have Unión Ganadera Regional in Guanajuato. We have the Veterinary Service from Barbados. We have the Andean community. We have WOA. We have Wildlife Organization. We have SENASA Argentina, SENASA in Peru, Colombia, and FIT Latina. So this is just to show you the type of audience that we have for these webinars or virtual seminars, as you wish to call them. That's the goal, really, to reach all levels, not just the official sector, but also universities, the private sector, because the response to emergencies is really an integrated response, without a doubt, and interinstitutional as well. That is the meaning of these trainings, to reach all sectors who have an important role in responding to emergencies. So before we move on to the questions, and I will ask Erica to maybe share the link for the platform, because within the framework of these webinars, we have developed a platform that is really home to all of these platforms. We almost have 2 years working and developing these trainings. So this platform is home to all webinars that we've organized so far, as well, and announces the upcoming webinars and other events as well, and also has official content from all institutions that belong to this organization of these webinars and the Interinstitutional Commission that provides all of this information to address ASF. We hope to complete the platform and continue to expand it to other transboundary diseases. That's where you have all of the material available. So I do encourage you to use the platform and share it as well. Yes, share the information about these webinars that are held monthly. Let's move on to the questions. Let's read them. We have a team from WOA and from ICA, and they've been screening the questions. We have the first one for John. John, so the first question is for you, and it is the following. What is the difference between the incident command system and the early warning system? So that's the question from Juan Francisco Chavez for John. John, go ahead.
Okay, I'm not completely familiar with maybe the individual country early warning system, but again, the incident command system is designed to be implemented, for a standardized approach to response. An early warning system, to me, is more of the indicators. For instance, several days or weeks out for a hurricane arrival, those kinds of things. And I guess my question is, did I understand the question correctly?
No, estás en lo cierto. O sea,
No, it's exactly what you understood. Early warning systems are when there is an early suspicion of an outbreak that is about to happen. There is a different approach, obviously, depending on each country. Maybe Michael would like to add something, or maybe Dr. Molina, with respect to early warning systems developed in your countries, so that maybe they can elaborate or... Michael, would you like to, or Dr. Molina?
Well, I think Dr. Molina and I just we started at the same time here. We both activated our cameras at the same time. I know in Canada there are significant efforts.
Bueno.
Oh no, sorry.
Go ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
Okay. In Canada,
Go ahead.
we do have significant efforts on to look for surveillance, perform disease surveillance in migratory populations, and we work extensively with our partner agencies. This is where our wildlife counterparts in as well as Environment and Climate Change Canada do a lot of tracking of diseases in wild populations. So we use that intelligence, and we need to work very closely with them in order to respond to detections within that population and track where domestic populations could be affected. Once a positive is incurred in a domestic population, we have a domestic find. That's when we would begin to implement our ICS principles and our ICS-based response in order to respond to that based on our mandate and our respective mandates as a regulatory organization.
Muchas gracias, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. I don't know if Dr. Molina now would like to elaborate. Go ahead. Maybe with an example. With the reports received by the countries at the WOA, we may hear that there is a Newcastle outbreak or that there is an avian influenza outbreak in Mexico. Now it's in Guatemala. Now it's in Belize. Now it's in Honduras. Now it's in El Salvador. These are early warning systems, I think, for Costa Rica, right? So what we need to do in that case is prepare. Be prepared in terms of passive and active surveillance so that we can be prepared when the outbreak enters the country. We are able to activate the ICS to operate, because the ICS is operational. The early warning system is preventive. I think that's the main difference. Thank you. Thank you. I think that these three responses have made the difference very clear. Thank you. So let's continue now. The other question was made by Alejandro Villaseñor, and this question was already answered in the chat. However, I would like to ask John again, and if he can answer it for everyone, not just those who are on Zoom, but also for those who are following on social media. This is the question: how often should we test our contingency plans? John, maybe you can respond.
Yes, I sent a quite lengthy response to the chat part of it, as well to the individual. But it really depends on where you are in your use of the incident command system that Dr. Molina referred to. An example would be the preparedness pathway document that I referenced that you all utilize. It gives a good overview of what you need to do to be prepared, training and exercise wise, in order to respond. And normally it would look something like you would have some trainings, you would have some drills or small exercises that would lead up to full-scale practice exercises operationally. And we normally build a training and exercise plan based on where we are in our individual country that would have individual small exercises leading to a large one. And that might take place over a 2 to 3 year period, but you would have some exercises and trainings each year, maybe each 6 months. I know some organizations have small exercises or drills every 3 months. So I think it depends on the need. And the question would be, what does it take for you to be proficient to respond and utilize the incident command system? I hope that was clear.
Yes, perfect, John. Thank you. So what I would like to say that both other panelists, Michael and Dr. Molina, anytime that you want to elaborate on any of the responses, even if they are addressed to one person, you can, of course, add things or elaborate further. If you wish to do so, please feel free to add anything that you wish to include. Next question, Rocio, I'm not sure who this question is for. The question by Pastor, Dr. Pastor from Carivet. Do you know who it is addressed to? It's for Dr. John Roberts. Okay, for Dr. John Roberts. Okay. And I think John has already responded it as well on the chat. But we will ask it again so that everyone can hear the response. So the question is the following. I'm under the impression that the incident command system is activated once the incident is focused on response, and it's focused on response and recovery. What is the role of other phases of risk management or risk reduction, such as prevention and preparedness? What is the role? Go ahead, John.
Sorry, I did not have my microphone turned back on. Again, I would make a reference to both of those documents we talked about, particularly the progressive preparedness pathway, in that in order to be properly prepared, you have to be trained and equipped and proficient in the aspects of response. So training in and exercising with the incident command system is definitely part of that preparedness. It's not something that you just take out of the toolbox that day that the emergency happens. It's part of that preparedness phase, so you are ready to respond. In the text that I wrote back on the chat, I even mentioned that for practice purposes, individuals have used the incident command system to organize in prevention efforts with media messages, dealing with producers, things like that. But you are correct in that it mainly is the standardized approach, for managing an incident, incorporating those best practices. But as we indicated, both Dr. Molina with the birthday example and Mr. DeMembro, probably apologize for the pronunciation. There are other instances of a planned event, such as prevention activity, where you might utilize aspects of it. So it can be something that's available for use in all of those phases up through response, and even in the mitigation parts of those things where you discern how you want to change the organization. They all work together. But to close with that progressive pathway document and the good essential management practices both refer to being prepared to respond, and it is part of that.
Thank you, John. Michael, go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, John, that was a wonderful pronunciation of my surname. So congratulations, sir. Thank you for that. Just to add on to a little bit of this, in other phases, you're right. ICS is very much response based. It's very much an operational system, a style of incident management. But I have used it for one in the preparatory phase prior to becoming part of the CFIA. Prior to using it in a response context, I used it very much in a preparatory format. And I had to chuckle when Dr. Molina was talking about the quinceañera, his example in quinceañera, because that's my experience in previous careers, preparing for an event. And I won't go on too much about the differences, but the principles employed are largely the same. You will still follow the planning process. You will still have the supporting structures. You will still prepare your operational elements. You'll still use the same resource ordering processes. All of those principles are still in effect. It's just a slightly different time scale and a slightly different sense of urgency, but you'll still have set operational periods and still move forward. Since joining CFIA, I've used this to greatest effect in the recovery stage. In particular, a success we had was in the recovery and looking at restock testing for ranchers after their herds were destroyed after during the bovine tuberculosis outbreak. So herds were ordered destroyed, and in order for them to become have their quarantines cleared, we needed to make sure, and before they could restock, we needed to make sure that the disease was not endemic to their herds. So we had to perform all of those restock testing over the course of months and even years. And we employed ICS. We kept the structure in place with a very expanded timeline, but still following these processes. And it was a fantastic opportunity to work practice in the system, to work an exercise calendar into our regular business. So it was a way to achieve our goal while still practicing on this system, which was absolutely invaluable for our future response preparations and efforts.
Gracias, Michael.
Thank you very much, Michael. We have Dr. Molina. Go ahead. I have an advantage because I answer last, and so I can check some of the things that I'm going to talk about and present them to you last. So since the incident command system stipulates that we have to speak in clear, simple language, and we've spoken about the risk management, disaster risk management cycle, I will take the liberty to present you a couple of slides so that we all speak a common language. This is the UN, but we also have the FAO. We have a disaster, yes, then we have early response and recovery. In Costa Rica, we call them first impacts. Then we have recovery, then we have rebuilding or reconstruction, then we have risk identification, and then mitigation and prevention, and then preparedness for the emergency. This is the humanitarian action process, and in our case, it would be the control and eradication of the disease, and the preparedness would be all the procedures, right? In this case, we need to get our ranchers or producers back to producing. So we have, after that, the stage for disaster risk reduction. This is the standard for risk reduction according to the UN, and the FAO adapted it in this way. So to answer the person who asked the question, you cannot design an action plan if you do not know what the risk is. So the risk has to be assessed every day, pretty much. And you have to have a very clear picture of the fact that a disease can enter through the borders. And so border control points are high risk points for the entry of diseases, ports, airports, borders, etc. So you have to do mitigation and prevention by training people and also readapting your plan. So how do you prepare? You have to do drills, you have to do exercises and continuously review the action plans for the incident. So when the event happens, this is here at the center of the slide, you have to execute the plan. And that plan will fail for sure. It will fail, and there is no emergency that is exactly the same as another one. So you adapt the plan and you move on to the recovery phase where you have to sit down and assess how the plan worked out, how the incident command system worked out, and how you can improve it. So I do agree with my two colleagues. This works for all phases of disaster risk reduction. Thank you.
And
Muchas
as I
gracias.
said, don't let me talk because I'll talk all day long. Thank you, Dr. Molina. This is the objective of these webinars, try to clarify all doubts, take advantage of the experts. So this is your chance. The next question, John, you already responded in the chat, but anyway, I will read it again. Let's see. No, this had not been responded. John, this is for you from Juan Francisco Chavez Cosio, and it reads as follows. In the European Union, there is only one system called early warning and response system. Do you think it would be better if the incident command system could include both? And there are really two questions. The next question would be, how are these two systems linked? And the animal health services, how do they, no. How are animal health services linked and how do they participate in the incident command system? Those are the two questions. And I invite the other panelists to speak in if they want to. John, go ahead.
Okay, first to the early warning system in Europe. I think the past two comments from my other two colleagues on the panel are appropriate here. There is a distinct difference between the implementation of the response and the early warning system. But having said that, in answer to the question, yes, you need both. The early warning system doesn't respond. It's not. It's much like our disaster management in the United States. They rely on the other resources of the government to do the actual response. And so, as discussed, particularly with what Dr. Molina said, there's got to be a common language. And if you're receiving help from other countries that utilize the incident command system, and this particular hypothetical country in Europe, if they're not familiar with the incident command system, you're starting from a place of not having a common structure, common terminology, and a common methodology to respond to the disaster. If I believe on the second half of the question, it's absolutely applicable to the animal health aspect. Again, many times, it's been my experience, public health emergencies such as the COVID gets much more media time, and many more people are aware of it than the African swine fever problem in the Dominican Republic. However, the African swine fever problem is just as important and requires a similar kind of response. And when any animal health organization, as described by my friend from Canada and Dr. Molina in Costa Rica, when other countries are affected and require the help or are affected by your operations, there needs to be a common language and a common understanding of the terminology and all of those things to where that response organization needs to be the same. Lastly, I would point to maybe a non-government type organization people are familiar with, the International Committee of the Red Cross. In their training, they actually have this same system that they refer to, and sometimes it has a different terminology to it, but most all of the components are exactly the same as the incident command system, and they teach that to their people so they will be able to integrate into the system. And briefly, if I might, in using that example, several years ago, I was asked by a country in Central America to provide some help because the Red Cross would come in and do whatever they wanted without coordinating with the government. And part of the issue was if your government or your ministry is not well organized, response agencies may feel like they have no choice but to try to do something on their own. So the solution was the ministry is prepared, so when the organization comes to assist, they blend into the ministry organization, the incident command system organization the ministry has devised. And so then they are there working for that ministry who has the legal responsibility for the animal health emergency, even if it's related to a hurricane or something. Hopefully that got at the answers they were, the questions they asked.
Gracias, John.
Yes, thank you, John. Perfect. Yes, I think it is very clear. With what you just mentioned, this is very much in line with the next question, and that is, in your experience, and this is a question not to any particular speaker. It could apply either to Dr. Molina, Michael, or John. But anyway, under what guidelines or legal framework, or what type of tool or interinstitutional tool have you worked on to integrate the different institutions under the incident command system? What is your support in your institution for all this interinstitutional work, where each institution has a role and an important duty in the incident command system? We could start perhaps with John. Do you want to go ahead, or?
Yes, I'll add something briefly, and I'm sure my colleagues have some comments. Going back several years, we used to say that cooperation began with a cup of coffee. And what we meant was, you want to know your counterparts in the adjoining ministries, local governments, surrounding states or provinces. You want to meet them before the emergency comes. And again, what we would hope for is to train and organize in the training together, so that the first time you meet those individuals is not on the actual response to a transboundary animal disease. It's well before that you've been to trainings, meetings, joint operational planning, and this is an additional job that we all have. And I know everyone has plenty of work to do, but this is an aspect of our current job in preparing for the emergency that we'll know will come eventually, either small or large. And I'd stop right there and let my panel colleagues respond further.
Gracias, John. Adelante, doctor
Thank you,
Molina.
John. Go ahead, Dr. Molina. Well, another anecdote, colleagues. As you saw, I am a specialist in horses. I worked for 16 years in the mounted police. Nothing has to do with this. That does not have to do with this subject matter, but a dear friend of mine took over the executive presidency of the National Emergency Commission, and he said, I want you to come and work with me. Right then, I had just graduated as project administrator or manager, and I said, well, what on earth am I going to do? A veterinary specialized in horses at the National Emergency Commission. And he said, I want you to help me develop a program for animals in the event of a disaster. Well, that was what, let's see, maybe 16, 17 years ago. I knew nothing about that. So all of this started. And as Mr. Roberts said now, it starts with a cup of coffee. It starts by a conversation. It starts by trying to build friendship. In our Latin American countries, demonized traffic of influence is basically, that is what it was created for. If you have powerful friends and you have friends with influences, you can do many good things if you use that power and that traffic of influences for what it is really worth doing. On the other hand, you talked about the legal side. There is not one single political constitution worldwide that does not say the state has the obligation to watch over the goods and the livelihood of its population. And there is no political constitution in the entire world that does not mention the right of citizens to health. So we're tying two things together here. ICA here, WOA, Ministries of Agriculture and Livestock. What is our job? What is the strategic objective of each institution in the agricultural sector worldwide? Well, feed people, right? Foods and nutrition, food security and nutrition. Okay. All political constitutions, all strategic plans of all governments mention food security and nutrition. And if to this we tie the Sendai framework of action, and the livelihood that talks about disaster risk reduction, but people think that disasters are only a volcano or the tsunami. No, 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 no. A disaster is an epidemic. And if we are left without food, that is a serious issue. So, legislation, if you look for it in your country, each one of you can go. I challenge you, go look for your legislation. Food security, nutrition, livelihood, look for that in your political constitutions in your country. And there's all kinds of legislation there. That is the way we started in Costa Rica. We started with a cup of coffee, as Mr. Roberts said. And here we are many years later with so many things that we have been able to do. And as we say in Costa Rica, we sometimes we have put our foot in it. We have made mistakes, but that has taught us to move forward. A very Costa Rican word. Move on, get a wiggle on, and try to do things ever better. We have done it that way, and I am sure any other country can do it because international legislation and national legislation, we have all kinds of it. Enough, more than enough. Thank you very much, Dr. Molina. I wonder whether Michael has anything to add. Otherwise, we can move on. Michael, go ahead.
Well, I was considering applauding after the last two speakers because I can't stress that message enough. I like the phrase, it starts with a cup of coffee. We also use the phrase, learn to know the neighbors or get to know the neighbors before you have to build the fence together. You do not want to be introducing yourself in the middle of an ICP. That's not the time to start learning about your respective capabilities, your respective resource bases, any of those things, and most of all, your respective mandates. In Canada, we have started not necessarily a strictly legislative process, but through memoranda of understanding and agreements between federal and provincial authorities, mostly to determine when there is an outbreak in a particular province what the respective mandates are, because they do change from province to province, sometimes fairly significantly, as well as what resources are available within each jurisdiction to aid in the response itself. One of the things that came back as a lesson learned from this current outbreak is we hadn't activated many of those simultaneously. Previously, we'd activated one at a time, but trying to activate all of them simultaneously, or 9 out of the 10 simultaneously, gave us some issues because there were some differences within jurisdiction and differences in legislation province to province. Another key element is we didn't think wide enough in scope. We didn't necessarily include all the partner agencies that we may have needed and would have been handy to incorporate into responses. So I talked about information sharing, and a number of those memoranda of understanding had information sharing clauses in them. Ability to share confidential information gathered between the partners for the purpose of the greater response and promoting the greater response. Unfortunately, when you add somebody who's not a signatory into your response, the questions of legality and sharing that information between all the partners, they come into question. It starts to become an issue. So it's expansion of those instruments, those memoranda. Now that's where we need to concentrate to adopt a more holistic approach and to enhance our flexibility. But cannot stress enough, get to know people, even though, and Dr. Molina talked about friendship, and that's fantastic. I would even go so far as to say you don't necessarily have to be friends, but you do have to function as colleagues, and there has to be that familiarity and the respect between the understanding that you're both there to do a job. If you're friends, so much the better. That makes the response a lot easier, but you do need to know capabilities at a minimum, and you need to know the players for sure.
Muchas gracias, Michael. Y
Thank
muchas
you very
gracias.
much, Michael. Thank you, all three of you. Wow, this has been so interesting. Today, there is great interest in the subject matter. There are many, many questions, but I don't think we'll have enough time. So perhaps just a few more participations, And the missing ones, well, we will share with the experts for them to respond. Leave us your emails in the chat, and then gladly we can send these to your emails. So the next question is for you, Michael, from Dr. McAllister, Kafur. He works for the General Secretariat of the CAN, the Andean Community of Nations. Congratulations for your excellent presentation, he says. And the question is, how from the institutional stance, how did you ensure the participation and integration of thousands of people and perhaps different institutions and sectors in the emergency response team? And this is much in line with what you just responded. Go ahead.
I would echo that. The responders that I talked about within and going through the numbers and the stats slide that I presented there, the responders largely were internal to CFIA, but there was some integration of resources from government partners, stakeholder groups, third-party contractors as needed. Largely, it's due to our adoption and all the agencies' adoption of the incident command system that we're able to integrate these individuals so quickly and so seamlessly, using the principles of comprehensive resource management, employing above all common terminology. Cannot stress that enough. As a government agency and as multiple government agencies, and I'm sure that those of you working for as public servants in your respective countries, you all have the same sort of alphabet soup or plethora of acronyms and abbreviations that you use, sometimes without thinking about it, making sure that we spell that out, making sure that we understand exactly what we're talking about and putting things in plain language. We also look at outlining with our comprehensive resource management, making sure that we know who we're requesting, we understand, and they understand exactly what they're expected to do. And that's communicated with them via the planning process, right? Their chain of command is clearly established. Their duties for the upcoming operational period are established, and their metrics for performance are very clearly stated to them. Right. We start with all of those, and they're able to integrate very, very quickly. Now, I won't say that it's been a complete rousing success. And as Dr. Molina said, we're not perfect. We have done this, and again, we've put our foot in it a couple of times, a few times in the past. But it's the more we adopt these principles, and the more everybody sticks to them, the easier that process is. And now we're looking more as we move forward with the lessons learned from this outbreak to formalize our resource management and formalize our processes for requesting resources from our partner agencies as well. So making sure that it's even clearer, they know the expectations and can integrate even more quickly.
Thank you, Michael. And related to this last thing you mentioned, on lessons learned in the last avian influenza outbreak, the question here is, what lessons learned could you share with all attendees, particularly practices that should be promoted and others to be avoided, so that the emergency response teams that have recently been created in other countries be taken into account?
An open-ended question, and I could get myself in a lot of trouble. And I'll try to keep remarks fairly short because we don't have another 5 hours for me to ramble on about this as well. I could talk about this for quite some time too. Consistency is absolutely critical. So consistency of training, consistency of standard, consistency of responder qualifications as much as possible. One of the things we found internally was we had training plans, we had exercise plans as part of our emergency management strategy. Those were not consistently applied or consistently kept up in various regions of the country. So we had responders, almost pockets of responders in certain units, in certain departments within CFIA who were trained to a very, very high standard and were very experienced, but others hadn't been trained. They hadn't been deployed to an emergency in 15 years or more. They had taken the introduction to ICS course in 2005 and it sat on the shelf. They'd never dusted it off before then. They'd never practiced it. So making sure that if we have people designated as responders and that is an expectation of them, they're given the opportunity to practice and there's a consistent standard that's established and applied to make sure that, for one, it ties into comprehensive resource management so that when we say we need a planning chief or we need a situation unit leader or we need a group supervisor, whatever, they know what's expected and we know what we're getting as the response organization to deploy. Another key lesson learned is communication. Cannot be stated strongly enough. That's communication internally in the terms of the response, communication with our organization as a whole. Because keep in mind, despite the fact that we had hundreds of people actively engaged on the response, their activities were affecting all of the other employees coast to coast and affecting things like export certification, transport of goods, transit of control zones, import requirements. All of their work was affected by that. So the communication needed to happen to them, communication with stakeholder groups, communication with provinces and other federal departments as well. So developing a comprehensive mechanism for communication will serve you well in the long run. With in early stages, we neglected that, perhaps not completely, but we didn't pay as much attention to it as we should, and it was to our own detriment. It did affect us in the long run. It is time well spent. So those are the two biggest lessons learned. And in my experience, when there is an issue in the structure or in response, I don't know that I would be too far out of line by saying that at least 90% of the time, if you look at the root cause of that issue, it's an issue with communication. Either someone did not clearly communicate expectations, someone did not clearly understand the terminology, there was some sort of breakdown, or someone wasn't included on a set of orders that should have been. So communication is critical. And in all the ICS courses I teach, there's a couple of slides and a whole unit devoted to that to say within an ICS organization, it is absolutely critical that information flows freely and everybody is aware of the plan and the expectations.
Muchísimas gracias, Michael. Y bueno,
Thank you very much, Michael. We have many outstanding questions, but I think that with this response, we will officially close the Q&A because unfortunately time has run out. The issue is extremely important and necessary. I think that we need to implement this in our countries. But like I said at the beginning, this is an overview, yes, to raise awareness of the importance of all of these issues, to prepare and to prevent and respond. And like we saw with the incident command system, how to manage that response to transboundary diseases, which can be ASF or others. So having said this, we will close our panel and we will also close our meeting. Thank you so much to all three panelists. It was really extremely interesting to hear your experiences. You really have so much knowledge on the topic and it's very rich, very interesting to hear about it. So with this, we will encourage the participants to continue obtaining training on these issues, to continue acquiring the tools provided and offered by international organizations to obtain training on these specific topics. I also wanted to share with all of you that the next webinar is already being prepared. The October webinar will mostly focus on surveillance So we will be working with issues of surveillance, specifically for prevention and for response. So these are the next topics that we will be covering. This year, we will have a webinar in October and in November. In December, we will not have a webinar. And we will continue next year for sure. So we will meet again next year. Having said this, thank you very much to all the participants who have stayed with us in our webinars. Please share the information. Please share all of these interagency efforts and share the information on capacity building because it's really, really important given that it is a key point for everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Molina. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, John. And thank you very much to Katia and to all ICA staff members who have helped us in the organization of these events. Thank you and have a very good week and see you in October. Goodbye.